Hi, Greg.
Hi, Hugh.
It's March 5th,
Yeah, it
2024.
is.
When I was a kid, Osborne, the family that is Trump's election team, they kidnapped me with Camille Sirhan in 1957 on the day Admiral Byrd was murdered. The news said Admiral Byrd died of a heart attack, but my mother was his nurse and she always told me he was murdered. Osborne kidnapped me with my twin, and we were both with Camille Sirhan in kindergarten class and at Hoover Elementary, and the FBI funded my school system. So
Clearly, Hoover and Webster.
yeah, and this was all staged. They funded my school system, and then Long and Wallace and Schultz handed me over to pedophiles like Osborne.
And now Osborne runs the sex crimes division of the FBI and runs Trump's campaign today.
Yeah, this is all staged. It's staged. They murdered my twin. My twin was back with me for one day, and then he was murdered. And then they dumped his body in a Pennsylvania field by Daryl Hall's house. But the FBI, they use fake DNA, and they say he's not my twin, and I know he's my twin.
Well, geez, I saw your childhood pictures, and I seen the pictures that they had from that case, and you two are identical at that age.
Yeah, I know. And L. Brooks Patterson, he covered up all these Oakland County child killings being done at my school and in my neighborhood. And Hoover and his gay friends were killing the kids. Uh, the last kid they murdered just before they murdered Jimmy Hoffa, my family member, was Timmy King, and that was President Ford's kid. President Ford's real name was King and Gardner, and I'm the King and Gardner families.
Yeah.
And they kidnapped him off of Gardner Street, and then they threw his dismembered, murdered body on Gardner Street.
Yeah, just like Gardner Street underneath the Hollywood sign,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
family that made Hollywood and intersects Detroit Street. And here you're talking about right there near Detroit.
Oakland County, Michigan.
Hmm.
Yeah, it borders Detroit.
Right.
And the FBI funded my school system. Hoover hired Marilyn Monroe, and her last name is Baker, and I'm the Baker family. And we all know a famous baker who said she loved Lee Harvey Oswald,
Hmm.
cheating on my family.
Hmm.
And then her best friend all her life has been Osborne.
So what we deduce from that is that Osborne had a heavy hand in killing Kennedy.
Oh, yeah, yeah, definitely. Chase Osborne had been governor of Michigan in the early 1900s. He always ran against my family, Baldwin. And then I went to school with Susan Baldwin. We used to do our homework together. And
So Hall and Osborne must have probably had some contacts with each other because that's why they're on the set of Rust. They Hall attacked Alec Baldwin.
yeah, Baldwin. And now Baldwin faces possible jail because he fired a gun that they loaded and handed to him.
And then when you were kidnapped at 5 years old, it was um, it was Hall and not Baldwin, but Osborne. It was in the
It was
basement among
it was Daryl
some
Hall
others.
and Osborne. L. Brooks Patterson was in the driveway protecting the Osborne family.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I escaped them when somebody knocked on a door in the house. They all ran upstairs and I wasn't chained up. So I slipped out a basement window from a table in the basement, ran past Elbrooks Patterson naked, crying.
Now, do you remember being really terrified at the time? I mean, four
Oh
or
yeah,
5 years
oh
old.
yeah, and Elbrooks Patterson did nothing to help me. Nothing.
Hmm.
This was 1957.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine a police officer just sitting in a squad car watching a naked kid run past him, crying and not investigating. You have to assume that he knew something. And
Yeah,
why would you think that he would know something about it?
he was always drinking too. He would
Yeah.
he would drink on duty.
Hmm.
Um,
Because they gave him a bunch of money to try to find the killers of the Oakland County
when I got
kids, and
home, Elbrooks Patterson watched uh, Osborne pick me up and shake me and tell me if I told anybody, he'd kill my family. He'd kill my mother and father and brothers and sisters.
uh-huh.
So I never told anybody, protecting my parents. And my father's hands had been cut off by Pratt that day. And the Twin Towers weren't built yet, but when they were built on Pratt Street. And that's not coincidence.
Yeah, and 68, I think, is when they built it, if I
Pratt
remember
was,
right.
Pratt was a Marine in World War II. My father
Hmm.
was Navy in World War II. And Pratt and Behringer cut my father's hands off. That's how they had access to kidnap me, torture, and rape me. And Elbrooks Patterson knew all of this, and he hid it his entire career.
And he probably was some sort of relative of yours or something, because you had a lot of the Brooks
The
family showing
Brooks
up at your
family,
house.
the Brooks family was introduced to me as my aunt, and the Brooks family would come over to my house.
You were never real confident they were actually your aunts, for sure not. You were never 100% sure. You just knew they came over and your
I
mom
was
would call them
introduced
aunt.
after that incident. I was introduced to the Brooks family, and I was introduced to the Krajewski family, who told me they were Italian, but they were actually Polish,
Okay.
and their son was a gay man. So the very people that hid my kidnap and torture and rape were introduced to me as my aunts and my mother and father's good friends.
And that's the infamous L. Brooks Patterson
And
of
every
Oakland County.
weekend they would come and spend the weekend and have dinner with my family. My entire childhood, through my teens, I was with Brooks' husband as he died in Michigan. His last words to me was, "Everything in the newspaper is a lie." He said, "Don't believe any of it."
Truer words were never spoken.
I know. And that's coming from, he was a Marine like Pratt, and he was married to Brooks. My friend Oglesby, we went to high school together, and the FBI funded my high school also. Webster was funding my high school. As
These
he,
are FBI directors, folks. You know, these are the same names as FBI directors, Webster and
Webster directed the FBI after
mhm,
Hoover and Kelly.
yeah. Hmm.
And I did an interview on Kelly's radio station for 3 hours, and then he created QAnon. And he told me he was CIA, but he was a FBI director.
Yeah, he was another FBI director. Yeah.
Everybody lies to me in my life. Um,
Hmm.
and he said he worked for the CIA making lasers for the CIA. And
And
he,
that makes sense because the FBI's been saying that the CIA killed Kennedy all this time, misdirecting it from them to the CIA, and the CIA had nothing to do with it.
and he had to buy the artificial rubies from the company I work for, Christensen Corporation. We made them. So
Okay. Yeah, rubies to make lasers. Yeah.
my whole life is like everybody lies to me. And then I have almost 1 million people earning their living off of my stolen trademark and patent. My family owned the patents for the Fuller transmission and semis. And that was stolen, as my mother's whole family was murdered at church. My mother was 7 and she was thrown from the car on fire, but she landed in a ditch full of water. So the water put the fire out and she lived. The kids that they missed, they went back to their homes in New Baltimore and New Haven and ran them over with trucks in their own driveways as they did things like ride their bicycles. And then
So this takeover of your family's been going on for a long time, even well before you were born.
since the 40s, since before World War II.
That's amazing.
And they stole the patents for buses and vans and milk trucks in the Fuller transmission. The Fuller transmission is you go 5 gears, you pop a pin, and you go 5 more.
Yeah.
The military used those transmissions also, and then my family created the geodesic dome the military uses. They use geodesic dome as barracks whenever they invade a country. And all of that is my family, the Fuller family. And they've murdered my entire family 5 times,
To steal money and inventions and patents.
along with my children. And they're always murdered on holidays, Christmas, Halloween, July 4th. With the exception of my first wife, Nancy, she was murdered as they shot Lavoy Finicum. Her leg was removed and then they murdered her that day.
And that made sense because she had been married to Lavoy, right? So
Yeah.
they matched that up
When
and made
I,
a point
when
out of
I
it.
went back to Michigan in 2017 and sat in L. Brooks Patterson's office, they murdered 5 kids in my family. In Indiana, 2 kids, and in Michigan, 3 kids. They murdered Karen Kissel's daughter, Serena. They murdered my brother-in-law's son, Tony Jr., and they murdered another Tony Jr. in Michigan. As I sat in L. Brooks Patterson's office, they all died on the same day at the same time in 2 states. And he never made out a proper murder report for my twin. That's why I was there. And they kept calling my family members and trying to put me in jail. They were trying to invent a story and a reason to put me in jail instead of telling the truth. And then they gave the world Dr. Nasser at Michigan State. And then they gave the world Anderson at Central or Michigan State. And they were supposedly doctors who raped their patients. But they never said anything about Governor Osborne's family. And that's the family that murdered my twin with Long, Wallace, Anderson, and Andrews. And all these people work for Senator Graham. Senator Graham, Peter Graham, and Bob Graham, and Senator Graham, and Billy Graham, they own the media in Detroit, Graham Media. They own the radio stations and the TV stations where I lived in Oakland County. And they completely covered up all of this my entire life because they were getting $25 million a year to solve the murders they never solved. If they solved the murders, they wouldn't get 25 million. So they never solved the murders. So they could collect 25 million from taxpayers. And
That was a federal government grant given to.
yeah, and L. Brooks Patterson died still collecting that grant of taxpayer money for Oakland County Police Department.
And when you tried one last time in 2017, that's when they killed those last,
They murdered 5 kids in my immediate family, all on the
yeah.
same day, as they tried to put me in jail. And these kids, uh, all murdered on the same day at the same time. And all of them are 30 years old.
Right.
And this goes right back to when they murdered Hoffa. A state policeman murdered Hoffa. My second wife's family murdered Hoffa. And I know this because they introduced me to Whitey, and Whitey sold me a car. And my mother-in-law was with Hoffa as he disappeared, and her previous husband, a state policeman, who would brag about murdering innocent people, had dug a hole with a crane. And on the day Hoffa disappeared, the hole was covered up and my horse disappeared.
Mm.
And Teamsters got their start on wagon trains with horses. Um, he stole my horse. The state policeman stole my horse as Jimmy Hoffa disappeared. And then the FBI detained me for Jimmy Hoffa's murder because I had bought a car from Whitey. And they tried to tell me that I buried Hoffa in the car I bought from Whitey. But the truth of the story is I was a couple blocks away from Whitey's home, and he was an outlaw and a renegade biker at that time. And the car broke down. The transmission broke down.
That sort of infers to me that the FBI was working with the renegades and outlaws and setting you up.
Well, of course they were. Prior to that, they had pulled me over and told me I robbed banks. I had 5 kids in the car, and they pulled me over on I-75 and told me I had just robbed the bank, and I've got 5 kids in the car. It's 9 o'clock in the morning, and I was on my way to a doctor with the kids. Yeah, my whole life through, people
Okay.
drug me to steal my job. I'd stop and have lunch in Utica, Michigan, and Washington, Michigan, and people always wanted my job, either my band Bottom Line. We were playing in big lounges in those areas, and they wanted my job as the band playing in the lounges, or they wanted my truck driving job, which was a nice job. I was making a lot of money, and it wasn't all that hard of a job. These they would poison my food, and then the police would automatically be right there in the parking lot. They'd arrest me and tell me I was drunk driving. And this was always in Oakland County. And they threw me in jail and told me I was drunk driving 5 times, and I wasn't even drinking.
Yeah, you didn't even have alcohol in your breath. All right. Because you
There,
don't drink.
there were no breathalyzers, and they never took me to a hospital to analyze my blood.
Right.
And they would just throw me in jail. The last time they threw me in jail, I had just stopped a gun and drug trade on a farm I bought from Mr. Mazar, and Mr. Mazar was Trump's tax attorney. And the entire Senate was running this illegal drug trade on the property I bought in Utica, Michigan. It was 7 square miles next to Lionel Trains. Lionel Trains was bought by Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young.
I think we figured this was around 78 or 79 or so when you were on this property.
77, I moved there.
27.
And as soon as I got on the property, there was kids in the driveway overdosed on cocaine and heroin. My neighbors were the Blanchard family, and they were dealing drugs.
Michigan governor's family, right?
Correct, another Michigan governor. And the 2 daughters were buying drugs from a guy named Hank. I stopped Tom and Hank's drugs, and instantly you got Tom Hanks in
See,
Hollywood.
that's how that shows the correlation between the FBI, the White House, and
That's
Hollywood, and
Osborne.
how they,
Now that's Osborne running the sex crime division, and
yeah. So they're covering up their drug trades along with it
yeah,
by
no,
creating actors to blur those lines.
they were getting drugs because they were selling guns that are illegal to Mexicans and Apache drug dealers in Mexico, and they would take
Right.
some return. And then where I lived in Utica, Michigan, in Oakland County on that farm in Macomb County, they were selling the drugs on ice cream trucks to the auto companies, the big three auto companies, the Ford paint plant, the Chrysler plant, um, General Motors plant, and then they would drive in and sell the drugs at lunchtime to the workers on the line. And that's exactly how they were getting rid of the drugs.
Well, that's where the money is.
And then they were distributing the drugs on Good Humor trucks, and the kids were taking ice cream off the Good Humor trucks that were laced with drugs.
Jeez.
And they
They'd
were
get the
all,
kids addicted through ice cream. That's insane.
well, these were young kids that were 3, 4, 7 years old.
Mm.
They had to go to hospitals because they were overdosed. So I stopped that gun and drug trade, and I didn't know it was a gun trade run by the Senate. And that night, I called the FBI and the police. And that night, they put me in jail and told me I was drunk driving again as they drugged me. And I went to jail for a year, and they made Hollywood movie stars out of all the drug dealers on that property.
Yeah,
And
because you're about 27 or 28 years old or something like that. I mean, you don't expect the government to be
I
doing
was,
these
I
things.
was a young man, and whoever was president went to Grenada and they murdered, I believe, 3,000 people that day with Hyduka Marine Corps from Alaska. And in Alaska is where the Osborne family came down when I moved to Tennessee and stole my handwritten letters from Bobby and John F. Kennedy.
President. Mhm.
They would break into my homes and steal my letters. And they supposedly ran a ministry in Alaska called Divine Time Ministries. And it's the same Osborne family that kidnapped me and tortured and raped me and murdered my twin. They showed up in Tennessee as I moved to Tennessee in an RV. And the Tennessee Valley Authority gave them a job running the park I was in. And once again,
It's hard to imagine that's not organized.
yeah, once again, that was organized. It would have been the FBI again.
Right.
And the FBI had hired Marilyn Monroe, my family member, and her real name is Baker.
Right.
And we all know a Baker who says she loved Lee Harvey Oswald, but lives with Osborne, his bunkmate, all her life.
Mm-hmm.
So
And who defends
I've
homosexuals.
grown up
Right.
knowing that the FBI murdered John F. Kennedy and Bobby, and they probably murdered my family member Marilyn Monroe also. Um, and I won't say any more about that. And I moved away from Michigan after that because my own brother, who had a Congressional Medal of Honor from Vietnam, he would get stationery off the president's plane. He could write the president a letter anytime he wanted. He had highly decorated from Vietnam because he saved the village on a grader. He was building airports and roads, and on that trail, Johnson put the military back on, Ho Chi Minh Trail or something.
Mm-hmm.
And he was building the airports, and my bass player was guarding the airports my brother would build, and he was decorated too. When my bass player, Tony de Blasio, when he died, a Russian mafia guy took his name and became mayor of New York behind Giuliani. And Giuliani was a knight of the London Queen. And Osborne came from the London Queen and kidnapped me at 4 as they murdered Admiral Byrd for asking Truman and Eisenhower why they were selling illegal guns to people all over the globe and getting drugs in return. That's why they murdered him. And then Eisenhower put himself on the Mercury dime, and we all know Freddie Mercury was the lead singer in Queen, and they were all gays. And then when they stole my trademark in '67, Webster, the director of the FBI, put the stolen trademark in his dictionary.
Mm-hmm. So this is
Eisenhower,
Eisenhower helping the Queen push the gay agenda.
Yeah, Eisenhower took the Mercury off the dime, who was Freddie Mercury's family.
Mm-hmm.
And then Huey Squier took my last name, and Huey Lewis took my first name, as Webster put my stolen trademark in the dictionary. And the entire California lawyers bar used my stolen trademark to study out of. And they disappeared my trademark, put it in the dictionary. And that was $3 trillion of theft. I had 30,000 entertainment contracts, and all the contracts were multi-million-dollar contracts at ASCAP and BMI, New York.
So one contract can be worth $100 million. Yeah.
The Joker song I put up, it was worth $87 million the day I signed it.
That's just one, right?
The day I signed for it in New York, they murdered my cousin in Florida in Palm Beach. A clown walked up to her and shot her in the head in front of her kids. And then that family that shot her in the head followed me to Tennessee. So all of this is organized, and it's all organized by the Osborne family.
Right.
And I've been aware of this my whole life.
Which are homosexuals from the Queen. Right.
They're all homosexuals.
Which is why the band Queen
And
is
then
a bunch of homosexuals.
And then Mick Jagger married Hall, and Hall was another one of the gay rapists who tortured me in Osborne's basement. And Daryl Hall's TV gave you the Eagles. And all of this was organized by Governor Osborne's family.
Right. And John Walsh went to your school from the Eagles, right?
He went to my church.
Went to your church, okay.
And the priest at my church was also Mr. Walsh. Now he went to Don Darrow High School. I went to Warren High School, and they're right down the street from each other. And he lived on 4th Street, and Dylan sang about positively 4th Street. Mr. Hughes, Hidden Dylan's Shoes was sung by Ricky Nelson. My family had made the first TV series and gave the world St. Jude for Children with Danny Thomas, Make Room for Daddy. And my whole life is like this. Every day of my life is another murder of another kid.
Yeah, every time you do anything, they blur all the lines.
They murder kids, and they throw me in jail. They make movie stars out of the drug dealers,
Mm-hmm.
and then they've forged DNA evidence, and they've done this my entire life. And that's why the man married to Brooks, who was a Marine like Pratt out of World War II, he told me, don't believe nothing in the news. He says the FBI and the police, none of it's true. And he told me this as he died.
And if the FBI is run in Hollywood, which we can see it is here, how in the world could your story, if they're the ones attacking you, how's your story ever going to get out?
I'm nobody, and the FBI detained me for Hoffman's murder. Stone cut the bone out of my foot as JFK was murdered.
Right.
And Stone and Osborne are running Trump's campaign.
Mm-hmm.
All of this has been organized since I was 4 years old. And It's just unbelievable. And then they keep putting Nazis in the White House. Obama was raised by the Queen of England in Kenya. Where does a little black boy in Kenya get $1 million to go to Harvard?
Yeah.
And then he and his wife were entertainment lawyers, as my entertainment federal license was stolen.
Where does he get a bunch of social security numbers and passports from England from? And if
15
he's not a British subject, how does he get British passports?
and 15 homes. And then all the senators in the Senate all have dual citizenship. They're all Turkish men who are Jewish from the fake country of Israel after our country made after World War II. And all the rabbis in Israel are from Turkey. All of them. 99.9% of them are from Turkey, Turkish DNA. And that's not God's family. God's family went north. They went to the Ural Mountains with Moses. The people pretending to be Jewish rabbis, they may be Jewish rabbis, but they're all from Turkey and they're not God's family.
So this is why they're all attacking Putin now.
They get a lot of billions of dollars every year of our taxpayer money for over 80 years now. And my whole life is like this. And the reason it's like this is my family made the USA. One of my murdered wives, Terry Heath, and she was murdered by 2 off-duty policemen who kidnapped her out of her Head Start office, and she created the Head Start program for President Reagan in California when she was 16, 17, 18 years old, just like I created Bottom Line. They trashed her CPS and Head Start office in Wisconsin, kidnapped her and drove her across 5 state lines illegally, 2 off-duty policemen. They were hired hitmen. And then just before she was murdered on a ranch in Tennessee, she told me those 2 policemen were stalking her.
She escaped from the trunk of the car, didn't she? And then called you.
Every time she walked her, she escaped from the 2 policemen and called me and asked me for help. She says, "You're the only guy I trust," because she knew I had been kidnapped by the same people who make porn movies in Hollywood. And those people are the people that kidnapped me in Michigan. And they would fly us off the Great Lakes, where our CPS and Head Start office was on the other side of the Great Lakes in Wisconsin. And she was protecting 2 little kids being used in porn movies, and they were attempting to fly them off to California to make porno movies. And as she was protecting those 2 little kids, they kidnapped her and trashed her office and drove her across state lines. So she naturally called me and asked me for help. I bought her a Civil War ranch and moved her from Wisconsin onto the Civil War ranch in Tennessee. The mistake I made is a guy showed up and told me about the ranch. And the ranch came from the Manning family, and Manning co-created the JFK archives, of which Osborne is a part in JFK's murder. And then as they were torturing me and raping me, Jackie Kennedy ran to honest this. I mean, how much more organized can this be?
Mm-hmm.
And Admiral Byrd, when they murdered him, they gave the world fake diaries about UFOs and aliens. And the History Channel was run by people from Turkey and Greece who do nothing but talk about aliens and UFOs. And my story's never told. And
they even call it Coast to Coast. That's the bar that you played in.
And I'm related to all the presidents on U.S. money. Mm-hmm. Terry Heath is General Heath, who protected New York in 1775 and 1776 for my family, George Washington. But I'm never on, I don't exist. And the FBI hides me my entire life. behind UFOs and aliens from Admiral Byrd, whom they murdered. And then they murdered the Kennedy family and Marilyn Monroe. And I never exist. I'm not in any book and no movie. Look at the books and movies just about Jimmy Hoffa. And I had at least 9 FBI agents detain me in my Troy, Michigan driveway several hours after Hoffa disappeared with my mother-in-law.
And not one of those books or movies
It was
mentions
about
that
me.
at all. Right.
And Miller and Tocco wrote the books and made the movies with other people.
Scorsese. Yeah.
And they both worked for me at Ruby's Trademark, Jack Ruby's Trademark. I rented from the Carousel trademark Jack Ruby owned. I rented a factory. And Tocco and Miller both worked for me. I even bought Miller a house. The Miller family was Agatha Christie in London. I'm the Christie family. That's my mother's sister. So they took over my mother's heritage, and now they're taking over my heritage. Cook and Perry at Apple are saying that my children are their children, and they're not. And they're doing this in cemeteries at colleges. And they're doing this all over the United States. And this is a big lie to cover me up.
And museums,
Right.
just like they're doing it with
And
movies and music.
the people putting Donald Trump in the office are the people who kidnapped me and murdered my twin with Camille Sirhan 11 years before Sirhan was framed for Bobby Kennedy's murder. And then my family was with President Lincoln in Ford Theater, Clara Harris. I'm also the Harris family. As the actor Bush shot him. And here I am stopping the illegal Senate gun and drug trades. They're selling the drugs to the auto companies in Michigan back in the 70s and 80s that they get for the illegal guns. And my family ran Henry Ford's mansion. My uncle Tony Anthony did that. He was caretaker there. And my family Harris was with Lincoln as an actor. Bush shot him. And then they make movie stars when I stop an illegal Senate gun and drug trade with Osborne in Hollywood. And this has been going on for over 200 years. And all of this, my daughter was kidnapped off her school bus with one of the Kennedy girls when they were 7. The bus stopped in front of my house. They were kidnapped, taken to an excavation company, locked in an earth mover, and I rescued them. She didn't show up after school. I went looking for her. The excavation company was 3-4 miles down the road. They couldn't have walked there. The police told me they walked there.
Yeah, they're like 5-year-old little kids, right?
They were 7.
7, yeah.
They didn't walk there. They were driven.
Right.
Boxed in an earth mover, and they were gonna rape and murder them. And then they covered that up and threw me in jail for a year. And the FBI,
And they turned your lawyers into part in a movie.
they murdered Judge Hunter Sterritt, Selfridge Air National Guard, and then Cheney recalled the Air National Guard 35 minutes before 9/11 happened. And the Twin Towers were built on Pratt Street. Pratt cut my father's hands off as they murdered my family member, Admiral Byrd, and gave the world fake diaries from him. He didn't write those diaries. It's not even his handwriting.
And wasn't it the Schwartz company that represented you in the case for your
Yeah,
daughter there, and yeah.
that's another part of my family. And Schwartz Video was the largest video distributor in New York. That's also my family. Back
And
to the silent
that's
films
yeah.
with people like Charlie Chaplin. Schwartz Video, my family was the largest video distributor on earth back then.
And that's why Spaceballs made that comment, may
My
the Schwartz be
family,
with you.
my family members, Ava Gardner married Frank Sinatra, and Ava Gardner's family would take me to World's Fairs. And the Gardner family made the first TV series on earth after Schwartz Video and the silent films. Make room for Daddy. Then you got Ricky Nelson, and my first murdered wife, murdered Christmas Day, was Karen Nelson. Karen Nelson Kissel. That's Ricky Nelson's family. And that was 10 years before they blew up the Pentagon and the Twin Towers. And then Bush says my name as my Uncle Mills films him. My girlfriend put him in the kindergarten class. He has a Freudian slip, says my name, and Bush knew he was stealing my federal license to publish entertainment contracts in every country on earth. He knew that. And Cheney recalled the National Guard back to Selfridge, which protected New York airspace. They had already murdered Karen. 2 years later, they murdered Terry Heath, and her family protected New York in 1775 for George Washington. McCain was running with Sarah Heath Palin. That's why he was running with the Heath family, because they protected New York when we became a country. They murdered Terry Heath, who lived with me on the Manning Ranch, and Manning co-created the JFK archives. They murdered Nancy Mellon there. They murdered Terry Heath there. I'm Harris Banks. My other wife was Mellon Banks. Chase is my family. My Aunt Gardner would go everywhere with Mr. Chase, who owns Chase Bank. They would run around paying cash for Cadillacs. You understand this?
Oh yeah, yeah. I
And
mean,
then
they took everything. They really stripped
oh,
your family bare.
yeah, they took our entire heritage, and now Joe Biden gives you Kamala Harris, who isn't my family. My family's in the Smithsonian, next to Ruby's shoes and Judy Garland's Wizard of Oz slippers. Were there with steam thrashers my family invented.
Yeah, the ruby slippers like Jack Ruby, yeah.
Yeah, and and Ruby is my birthstone.
Hmm.
They completely marked me, and they were waiting for me to be born.
I mean, that's obvious just with Osborne, you know, and the
Yeah,
Wizard of Oz.
yeah. And then my family, Ian Fleming, right here, a block from me, John Fleming lives here. And then you have
That's who wrote Wizard of Oz for those, or made the movie rather, not who wrote it, but
Ian Fleming
yeah.
wrote the James Bond movies. My family funded it with Austin Healy, Harris. My family funded the James Bond movie. I don't exist. And John Fleming lives a couple blocks away from me. I just noticed that this morning.
Interesting.
Big
That's why they murdered Fleming here less than a mile from my house.
Gretchen Fleming. John Fleming lives here by me. Then Osborne owns U.S. Bank. Nowadays, they sell stock for it, so it looks like it's a CEO in a corporation, but Osborne made U.S. Bank. Osborne's from London, another Knight of the Queen. Sharon Collins asked me to marry her twice from London.
Hang on, let me correct myself. We don't know that Gretchen Fleming was murdered. Gretchen Fleming disappeared. So I need to make sure I
Oh,
correct that.
you don't know anything. And then
Yeah.
Zuckerman, who's in charge of the case, he's attached to Hollywood. I went to high school with Zimmerman. Peggy Zimmerman was my girlfriend. So all of these things are together with the FBI funding my school system. As
I'm telling you, that stuff about the Star Trek and Fleming, and I mean, even the USS Fleming spaceship that was on the series is 1881 Fleming, just like the NCC 1701. Fleming was 1881, which is a number I put on my board all the time and explain. It's so fascinating that it just blows my mind.
this is all military communications, and it's all
Mhm.
going through the FBI.
Right,
After they murdered John F. Kennedy and Bobby and Marilyn Monroe, they had to get rid of Marilyn Monroe because she was probably going to tell on them.
right.
And she's the Baker family. She's the same Baker family that investigated Lincoln's murder.
Yeah, they're the good side of the Baker family, right? That
And
goes way back.
Kamala Harris used to sell slaves to Joe Biden's family from Africa. As
Yeah,
my family sat with Abraham Lincoln fighting slavery.
yeah,
And
right,
they want to pretend like she's my family. She's not
right. Nothing could be further from the truth. And she was selling her slaves to Biden's family's ancestors. He was the ones buying them.
right.
They were a bunch of
And
slave owners.
her own father at a university in California, my family built, wrote a book about selling slaves.
I mean, how dare she just come out and
And they were
pretend like she's
they were
anti-slavery family?
they were part of the tribes where they got the slaves. They were taking their own tribes people and selling them, putting them on ships, sending them to America and selling them as slaves. And now she's in the White House,
And
pretending
everybody's buying it. People are that ignorant.
and pretending to be my family. As Cook and Perry say, my children with Nancy Jacobs are their family, and they're not. And they put this on gravestones already. They're stealing my whole family's heritage right out of the Smithsonian and right out of the White House. And it's not one of them. All three parties are doing this. The Paul family was my business manager at Bottom Line as the FBI stole my trademark. And as my bass player died of a heart attack, a Russian mafia guy, and Tony de Blasio was born in Brooklyn, New York. A Russian mafia guy went into court the day he died, took his name, and became mayor behind Giuliani. And this is not the Russian government. This is Russian mafia. Big difference.
Right, right,
Putin is not the mafia.
right.
That's like saying John F. Kennedy was the mafia. He's not.
Right,
You
right.
know? So my whole life is like this. On the day they murdered Kennedy, they murdered 5 Duncan kids. Mr. Duncan was my good friend. My father and Mr. Duncan shot a bear on the back of their farm back in the 30s in New Haven, Michigan. Mr. Duncan kept the bear cubs they found the next day. They didn't know that it was a mother bear and had cubs. They kept the cubs alive, and he had one of the cubs behind his restaurant and lounge. And then they murdered his kids. And they told the world that they all ate arsenic. They all sat at their kitchen table and ate a box of rat poison. And they ranged in age from 3 or 4 years old to 12 years old, and they knew what rat poison was. They didn't sit around the kitchen table and eat rat poison.
Yeah, these were the Duncan kids that were
And then
killed the day that Kennedy was killed
then the
too.
FBI that funded my school system gave you Agatha Christie, Arsenic and Old Lace, made it a classic, and made every kid in the country read Arsenic and Old Lace.
Because they fed those Duncan kids
Agatha
arsenic,
Christie,
right?
and Christie is my family from Canada. Doug Christie came from Canada, married my mother's sister. And then you have a Canadian as New Jersey's governor.
Yeah, Chris Christie family, and that's why they're saying Hoffa's
And
now in New Jersey, right?
his family stole my inheritance when Gardner died,
Hmm.
before he was governor. This is just like Elon Musk saying he didn't get money from his father's gem mine. His father owns a gem mine in South Africa. That's where his money came from. And there's books written about it. And all of these people are Nazis, right from Hitler. The Queen was married to Hitler's SS guard.
Right.
All her kids are Hitler's SS guard's children.
Yeah, and America welcomes them like, yeah.
They attacked me at birth.
And so Putin says he's trying to stop the Nazis. He's telling the darn truth. And we're the ones that took all the Nazis in.
And I rescued my daughter out of Dan's excavation. She was locked in an earth mover.
Yeah.
They were going to bury her. And his name is Dan Cooper. He raped her. She had a child at 13. And he was an adult.
Mm-hmm.
And now you have the Mini Cooper from London. And then you have Anderson Cooper 360 on CNN, run by the BBC. You got this picture? All our news,
Sure do.
all of America's news comes from London as they attack my family, who's George Washington's family.
Right. I mean, they've got it down. They cover every little detail.
My wife, Nancy, who was murdered on Halloween Day, I found her murdered, gave her CPR, revived her at 3 o'clock in the morning. Got her into a hospital, and they murdered her a second time 35 days later after cutting her ears off and slitting her throat. And they slit her throat from the inside. You got this?
Explain that. I don't know what you mean by that.
The gay nurse opened her mouth and slit her throat on the inside.
Good gosh.
After they removed her ears, 2 weeks prior. When they removed her ears, they put pillows all around her ears, kept her sedated so she couldn't talk to me. And they tried to hide her missing ears from me.
Wow.
By placing pillows all around her head. And they wrote natural causes on a girl's death certificate, my wife, Nancy Mellon. And her ears were missing. I had to bury her without her ears. And there was
one of the doctors that apparently didn't know what had happened had already reported on it, and that's why we have the medical record showing she was raped there.
The security in that hospital in Johnson City was from Senator Graham's state once again. He was a state policeman from Senator Graham's state. He watched them slit her throat, remove her ears, and he did nothing to stop it.
Unreal.
And they hired actors to come in and visit me while I was when I would come visit her in the hospital. They had actors. They had a guy that looked exactly like her brother who wasn't her brother. They had Christensen, who built the Guidestones. They had his wife come visit me in the hospital and tell me not to sign myself into the hospital. They'd murder me. Well, they didn't murder me. They murdered my wife on Halloween Eve.
Wow.
And she had gay nurses. They sodomized her, cut her ears off, and then they slit her throat on the inside.
To hide it, right.
And then they told me that she wasn't murdered at my house. She had listeria. And this is a big lie. Because the people who fed Victoria came to me in a store a mile down the street and asked me if my wife was in Johnson City Hospital. The very people who fed her gave her listeria in the hospital. And then there was 2 black women. One was running Jehovah's Witnesses church. She came and gave Victoria her last rites the night she was murdered. And she came from Maine.
Right. Well, Jehovah's Witnesses wouldn't call it last rites, but yeah, I see what you're saying. Right.
So she came and read Victoria her last rites on the night she was murdered.
Yeah.
And then another black woman came into the house and checked out the house and found the bedroom that Victoria slept in.
Hmm.
And then at the hospital, two black women showed up next to her room in a vacant room when they poisoned her with listeria and cut her ears off. She'd already been sodomized by two
So,
by two
yeah.
gay black nurses. And this
Okay.
woman was in a wheelchair. They took her out of her wheelchair, sodomized her, put her back in her wheelchair, gave her listeria, cut her ears off, and then they slit her throat. And they wrote natural causes on the death certificate.
Hmm.
Uh, we could end this here.
A lot of information. I'm just thinking about how England is, they have hundreds of years head start on us
Uh,
with
the,
this espionage and organization. And
the Queen's dead, but Hitler's SS guard's done as King of England now.
well, there's only a handful of countries in the entire world that England has not invaded. Not has invaded, has not invaded. There's only a few that they've not invaded. And they've got centuries and centuries
They
of
stole my,
espionage and tactics down.
they stole my American trademark in 264 countries, all
Yeah.
at the same time as Webster puts my trademark in his dictionary, and he funded my school system.
I wish people could get the understanding of how the Queen and the FBI and the gays, the homosexual agenda are all
All
part
the,
and
all
one.
the senators are getting payola from it.
Right.
They're all criminals.
Right.
Ron Paul sold me out to the Russian mafia for money. He needed a house.
Hmm.
That's the independent party.
Yeah.
Trump, the people putting Trump in office murdered my twin and tortured and raped me with other kids in Oakland County.
Yeah, I get it.
When I was in Elbert Patterson's office, I put in a Freedom of Information Act for I was DOA 3 times at 3 hospitals in Michigan and Oakland County. And the hospital should have had the murder records, and the police department should have had the murder records.
And and they won't allow you to have them.
I put in requests for when Stone cut the bone out of my foot as torture on the day of
No record. Right.
Kennedy. They denied all my Freedom of Information requests, and this is as Trump's running to be president. And the FBI did this. They completely denied it. I went to
Yeah.
each hospital individually, and they didn't have any record of my murder.
Right.
That's so illegal. It's pathetic.
Yeah. Yeah. And obviously Trump has some knowledge of it, or he wouldn't show up in Michigan there on the anniversary of her murder right there, where she was from.
Of my wife, yeah. Yeah, they know everything.
Mhm.
They murdered my wife.
And we're not saying this because we like Biden. He's a scumbag too.
No, I
It's
don't
just
like any of them.
right.
All 3 parties are criminals.
And I just don't want somebody to come up and say, "Well, they're a bunch of Democrats." Not even close.
My lead guitar player became a dentist, just like Ron Paul is a dentist.
Hmm.
I went to school with the Paul family. The FBI funded that school. This is all one great big setup in my life to hide my family's heritage, to hide me. And
So
they're taking over my family's heritage in all the colleges and museums.
and they've won. I mean, Britain runs everything. They run NASA and the space agencies. They run automobile manufacturing, all of Hollywood. I mean,
It's all,
Netflix. I mean, everything.
it's all the Hitler's SS guard is now,
Yeah.
his son is now the King of England.
Well, their plan to take over America has worked. I wish Americans would
Thank God he has,
finally
thank
begin to
God,
acknowledge it.
thank God he has cancer. I hope he dies soon. His,
Yeah.
his mother in the London throne and their knights murdered my entire family 5 times.
Yeah. Yeah. Extremely evil people. Nazis, literal Nazis.
They are Nazis. She
Yeah.
married Hitler's SS guard. All his
Literal,
children,
actual Nazis, and everybody
anybody,
follows them around. And
anybody that can inherit the London throne is a SS guard for Hitler. And what's the Republican agenda now? They want to trash the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and give you the London Bible as your law.
while supporting and pushing homosexuals now, just like Trump just had a gay wedding at his Mar-a-Lago thing.
At Mar-a-Lago, and gays murdered my entire family 5 times.
And people still buy it. It's
And
just
my,
mind blowing.
my family wrote that Bible. King James is my family member. I'm related to all the kings of Europe. I don't believe in that Bible. I know that Bible was put out there to control the masses. And I don't,
And it's
I
look
know.
how easily it's working.
Yeah, yeah.
Trump is 100% not what he claims, but
He,
everybody buys it
he
while
doesn't,
they're
he doesn't believe in God. And
no,
when did he ever go to church?
never.
You know, and he was buying kids and people from Epstein.
Yeah.
And Epstein brought the Beatles to America. And I'm Herbie, the Volkswagen Beetle. Even my birthday, 53, is on the Volkswagen, the Beetle. My card partner, Dave Sinclair, brought the Beatles, introduced the Beatles to Ed Sullivan. He was my card partner from Vegas.
Right.
He went to jail for 2 marijuana joints. He spent 30 years in jail with my Uncle Gardner, who murdered a policeman. And there's no lie in this. This is all truth. Anybody can look up Gardner in Marquette State Prison in Michigan. Dave Sinclair was there. My Uncle Gardner watched over him. After he brought the Beatles to America, and gee, his name is Epstein, just like Jeffrey. And you know as well as I do, they murdered Jeffrey. Just like
Obviously.
they murdered L. Brooks Patterson, murdered his own nephew in his jail cell, hung him in his belt. As he confronted L. Brooks Patterson about hiding my kidnap and torture. I told his nephew about it. His mother was Mrs. Brooks. We went to school together. We were close like this, best friends.
And there we are, back around full circle to L. Brooks Patterson.
They murdered him in his own belt in L. Brooks Patterson's jail cell to hide me, his own family member. And then, you know, Patterson and Perry, my family members, Westhouse was Perry family and Cook family. And the Florence family from Italy, that's the Westhouse family that buried Jimmy Hoffa. Real mafia. I divorced them because that family tried to murder me 3 times after they murdered Hoffa. I divorced her. She wouldn't quit selling drugs.
Yeah, it's a good reason.
And they still stalked me and murdered my wives without.
Yeah, as if you did something wrong, right?
Osborne and Graham. And all of this is true.
Right.
Roseanne Barr lived in the same neighborhood I did with Garland. Biden gives you Attorney General Garland, knowing I need the Attorney General to look into my 4 wives' murders. He won't look into it. He's gay.
Just like Barr wouldn't, right?
He's gay. Barr gave you Epstein. Roseanne Barr works for Graham.
And anybody says, well, it's such a big story, you'd think the government would
Roseanne Barr told the whole world that Hollywood was using her as she worked for Senator Graham at Channel 4 in WWJ radio. That family runs Graham Media with Osborne, the family that kidnapped me and murdered my twin. And all of this is true.
Yeah.
We'll end it here, Greg.
Okay.
I doubt anybody will watch this video to the end. Nobody ever does, because I can tell by their comments they never watch. And that's why I keep making them and putting them out there.
I don't know what it takes to get people just to
They don't read
have
books.
a mind and pay attention.
They don't read books. They don't care about history. They care about absolutely nothing other than sex and drugs. Our whole country is now on marijuana, a hallucinogenic, and they're legalizing magic mushrooms now. They all hallucinate.
Right. Right.
And you can tell any girl online tells you that the men, all they do is attack them for sex, as they do hallucinogenic drugs.
Right.
And none of them read, none of them watch a video like this. Very few, maybe 1 out of 5,000.
Right. Right.
And you know, I always have 5,000 friends on Facebook, and none of them watch my videos. None of them read my posts. They ask to be my friend, and they don't even know my name.
Yeah.
The first thing they ask me is, "What's your name?"
Yeah. And your name's right there.
How could they ask me to be a friend without my
Uh,
name?
They have to be constantly high to be this stupid. And then you showed me like hundreds of them to do this. It's so inexplicable as to just
I just can't believe it. And I always have
Mhm,
5,000 friends.
mhm.
I have 5,000 friends because they see George Washington as my family and President Jackson as my family.
And you'll delete 5,000 of them, and then 3 weeks later you have 5,000 more.
Lincoln sent my family the very first coin he minted with his photo on it. And it was a gold coin in a plastic box. The very first coin he minted of himself. Bye, Greg.
I'll see you later, you.
I'll send this in the usual way. You can put it on YouTube and, on Facebook. Take care. Have a good
You
evening.
too. Good night.